news. It's now time to take a look at news stories making headlines around the globe. We begin here in Nigeria as President Bola Tinubu has, during a one-day working visit to Kaduna State, commissioned a series of projects aimed at boosting infrastructure, healthcare and transportation. He commended Governor Ubasani, stating how proud he is to work with him. Arise News correspondent Nisi Gabriel reports.
President Bola Tinubu arrived in Kaduna to kick off a packed schedule of inaugurating key developmental projects under Governor Ubasani's administration. The president's first stop was Rigachuku in Igabi local government area, where he commissioned the ultra-modern Institute of Vocational Training and Skills Development. Next, President Tinubu unveiled the 300-bed Bola Ahmed Tinubu Specialist Hospital in Millennium City, a flagship project designed to enhance healthcare access and ease the burden on existing facilities. In a push for eco-friendly transportation, the president also launched 100 compressed natural gas buses as part of Kaduna's clean energy and mass transit agenda. President Tinubu was full of commendation for Governor Ubasani. He emphasized his administration's commitment to empowering the states.
And we've seen a governor, Ubasani, an agent of change, stability, love, unity, and progress. Ubasani has performed wonders and changed the environment from previous toxic, uncontrollable environment to a stage of life, progress, and development. I say thank you.
Governor Ubasani praised President Tinubu's leadership, describing it as a guiding force, delivering impactful results and transforming lives.
It is a profound affirmation that leadership, when grounded in empathy and vision, can change destinies. You embody that leadership, one that listens, acts, and heals. You remind us that governance is not an end in itself, but a sacred trust bestowed by people, a trust to serve with integrity and purpose.
Mr. President and Your Excellency, sir, by consenting to commission the hospital, you affirm our national resolve to reverse outbound medical tourism, where billions of US dollars are lost, to realize the health-related sustainable development goals on the Nigerian soil. I would like to describe His Excellency, Senator Ubasani, as the master of projects. Where all governors failed, he has done it.
Other projects inaugurated included road networks such as the 24-kilometer Kafanchan Township Road, Tudumbiri Road, and the 22-kilometer road linking Kauru and Kubao local government areas, all aimed at improving rural connectivity and driving economic growth. Nisi Gabriel, Arise News, Kaduna.
Now to elsewhere in Nigeria, the sole administrator of Rivers State, Ibok Ete Ibas, has jacked up the size of the 2025 budget proposal of the state from 1.43 trillion naira forwarded to the National Assembly in May to 1.846 trillion naira, showing an increase of 365 billion naira. He made the increase of roughly 15% known while appearing before the Senate Ad Hoc Committee on Oversight of Emergency Rule in Rivers on Thursday. Arise correspondent Omo Bazuaye tells us more.
Barely a month after President Bola Tinubu forwarded a budget size of 1.43 trillion naira for Rivers State to the National Assembly, the sole administrator, Ibok Ibas, was at the Senate to defend the details of the state's expenditure. What Ibas presented was, however, 365 billion naira higher than the total expenditure sent by Tinubu in May, jacking the figures to 1.848 trillion naira.
After receipt of the additional information on the first quarter expenditure, the reviewed projected expenditure for 2025 is 1.846 trillion naira.
Ibas said the upward review was as a result of increased revenue inflow, which stood at 415 billion naira as of May, away from a projected figure of 383 billion naira. He explained that the revised version contains new items that were not captured at the time the budget was sent to the president. According to him, some state officials simply refused to provide him vital information.
However, the budget proposal presents an integrated framework to strengthen revenue mobilization, accelerate infrastructure delivery, enhance human capital, and promote inclusive economic growth.
The budget clearly emphasizes the return of all the suspended elected officials of the state with budgetary allocations to cover their spendings. In his remark, Chairman of the Senate Committee, Opeyemi Bamidele, confirms the hike, explaining that it is to drive massive infrastructure development in the state, as well as pay pension arrears.
They had increased it by some 15% or so, based on project.
A look at the 2025 budget proposal for Rivers State shows that almost 70% of the total size of 1.846 trillion naira that is now being pushed for Senate approval is earmarked for capital spending.
Our committee also notes with satisfaction the fact that over 70% of this budget, as proposed, is going into capital expenditure.
The Senate is expected to continue with its deliberations on the revised 2025 budget proposal for Rivers State, placed before them by the sole administrator in charge of the state, Omo Bazwai, Arise News.
Now, on to the other news. The Nigeria Governors Forum has identified illegal checkpoints, multiple taxation and poor infrastructure as major factors driving up the cost of food and livestock transportation across the country. This position was made known in a communique issued at the end of the forum's third meeting for 2025 held on Wednesday night and read by the Lagos State Governor Babajide Sanwo-Olu. During the meeting, the governors received a detailed briefing from the National Security Advisor, who was accompanied by the Ministers of Defense, Agriculture, Livestock Development and Transportation. The officials presented findings that showed how various actors' proliferation of unauthorized roadblocks and extortion along transportation corridors has contributed significantly to food price inflation and inefficiencies in the supply chain. The NSA informed the forum that a high-level interministerial committee had already submitted a set of recommendations to resolve these challenges. Now, these are some of the major challenges that need to be tackled when we are looking at the type of inflation that maybe doesn't come up on spreadsheets, the type of inflation that maybe isn't documented by NBS.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because when we're looking so much about our headlines and about data, there's so much that goes on in the informal economy, if you can even refer to this situation as an informal economy. That doesn't really show up on data, but still has a very strong impact on people's lived realities. So when we're looking, or we're hearing that the government has not only identified that this is an issue, that it exists, but has also come together to devise plans on how they can tackle this, I think is something that is worth commendation. So I do think that many people who do work or are directly affected by this food insecurity ecosystem, they would definitely appreciate the fact that you've got state governors coming together to devise a plan on how this can stop being a reality. I do think that in addition to them putting together actual punishment or deterrence, there has to be something to address the societal side of this, because a lot of this type of corruption, this type of extortion comes from a place of poverty. So I think that that also needs to be tackled on a holistic level, so that people will not individually be motivated to do such a thing, because it has such a tragic, long-lasting domino effect on everybody, not just in pricing, but just for the actual well-being of people who work in the food industry, who are traveling many, many miles from one point to the other. I think that many people will welcome the fact that the government is now going to put measures in place to protect them from this type of frustration and extortion. We were also looking at how the president was in Kaduna State. We know that he had pushed his journey to the state forward because of his trip to Benue earlier this week on Wednesday. And I do think it is, again, another thing that's worthy of commendation to see what has happened in Kaduna State. I think that Governor Ubasani would be quite proud to hear the president commend him in such clear and unequivocal means. He talked about how he believed that under Governor Ubasani's leadership, the state of Kaduna had gone from being one that he called toxic to one that is now being able to benefit from the benevolence of security, stability and peace. I mean, if we're looking against the backdrop of Kaduna itself, we do know that under the leadership of former Governor Nasir El-Rufai, Kaduna did have quite serious security challenges, ethnic-based violence. And now we can see that under this new administration, that is no longer the case, especially not as serious as it was under the previous administration. So I do think that it is always something to be welcomed. The president has commissioned a lot of different projects, vocational centers, lots of different roads, lots of different projects in the state, many of them, if not all of them, many of them named after the president himself. So I definitely think that he can find himself a good home in Kaduna thereafter, but it's definitely something that is worthy of commendation across the board.
So at first, I think I have a problem with all of this naming things after the president. I think the president and his age also refuse some of these things, even if people out of sycophancy want to name things after him. I think it's best he refuses it. Because when you name things, you name it in honor of people. You want a particular part of our history to be represented in those things. He's still serving. Maybe probably when he's finished serving and people can remember him and say, okay, you know, let's lay that. I think that's even not because somebody's in power. I mean, it gets a little bit too much. But I must also commend the president for doing something very important, rewarding and giving a national honor to the likes of Colonel Umar.
Yes.
The CFR. And he said it was an oversight at that point, and he announced him and he gave him due recognition. Because Colonel Umar has been one of the most vocal voices in this country. Throughout the struggles of June 12, Colonel Umar was a prominent voice that spoke truth to power, and he continues to speak truth to power. In fact, it's an interviewer's delight. Anytime you have Colonel Umar on, definitely you engage him on issues. His opinion and they're precise and sharp on things. Also, I want to give very good commendations this morning to the Kaduna State Governor, Ubasani. And I do expect less. Because you see, the president said something very important. He said, Ubasani is my comrade. They were both comrades in the fight and the struggle for June 12th. Ubasani took a very prominent role. Shehu Sani also took a very prominent role. These were people that were writing, these were people that were making their voices heard, and they never did relent. And they suffered dearly for it. So, you know, life is now turning full circle. 30 years after, most of those that were in the prime struggle for June 12th, the likes of Kari, Define and the likes, are now getting into position of governance. And that's why we'll ask them accountability questions. But in terms of Kaduna, Ubasani has done very well. Prior to this time, Kaduna used to be a cesspit of a lot of brickbats, you know, religious, intense rhetoric that was anti-development. And it was very tense. But guess what Ubasani has done? He's reached us across Aya, Southern Kaduna and all of that. You remember the other day, he went to a Christmas carol in church. He engaged people across the Aya. Tell them that I'm here for you. In lots of the other areas that a lot of projects have not been done, he started doing projects there across both Southern Kaduna. And that's why everybody loves him. You see, if you do well, people will appreciate you. That's why Ubasani is a darling today. You're not hearing a lot of those brick vans, a lot of those giddy fights again in Kaduna. Because the man understands one thing, that diversity is strength. So because people are different does not mean you should divide them, but you should use it as a strength and bring them together and do well for your state. And the state is getting the reward for it today. He also thanked the president, you know, for the initial, you know, budgeting line item to helping them when they want to start their mass transit thing and, you know, light rail projects and many other things that the presidents have done for them. So this is a very welcome development. We saw Namadi Sambo there also, I must have to also use this because they released a message from Kaduna State saying Lamani Sabo is not decamping to APCO because there were messages from sources that were saying, oh, he might be going, but they are saying he's not decamping, but he's there with them. So he's very chummy with the governor. And that's a very good sign because Ubasani is doing well. As regards the governors, I just think that's just real talk. Is it today the governors are just knowing that illegal taxes and checkpoints are causing inflation in the country? They can't do anything about it.
They can.
The next thing, the police will tell you that, oh, those were strategic checkpoints because of insecurity in the country and the military. Is it the governor that want to dismantle all of that? Secondly, the excess money. What about the excess money Agberu is charging in their states? Is that not part of excess taxes? Don't some of these governors even give Agberu the rights, unscrupulous elements to collect taxes in the state? Didn't we see it happen in many states? Are they not fleecing of market women? Are they not fleecing of citizens that do businesses? Are most of these taxes remitted to government coffers in the first place? So all of this is just another talk so that they're not going to say they are not talking. Femi will be here. Those illegal taxes will still continue a great deal. Some people will still come and meet you and say, we are from council. We are collecting taxes that never get reverted to the government.
Well, perhaps the government should come out and give, exactly, just addressing that, to tell people what they should do in that situation.
Because it's political interest. I want to ask you, for instance, in Lagos, the money they collect from bus drivers, and does that money get remitted to government? Does it get remitted to government?
Where does it go? Who collects it?
Does it get remitted to government? Why are we deceiving ourselves?
I think it's a valid point. It's a valid point, and these are some of the sort of institutional and pseudo-institutional things that we often discuss here. And why is it of huge concern? It's of huge concern because if you look at the latest statistics, inflation statistics, excuse me, you find that the disparity in inflation numbers between the various states is shocking. You have Borno State, which recorded, I need to get my data, but it recorded almost over 60% food inflation. And then you have some states that are recording around 20% food inflation. And that brings the national average to the 20s. But the disparity is concerning. And we know that, fine, in the case of Borno, there are issues around insecurity and so forth. But there are clearly some structural issues that are happening on the value chain that are leading to this huge disparity when it comes to the issue of food inflation. If you remember the last month that the inflation numbers were released, Bismarck Rowane had even commented and said, why is it that even food-producing states have higher inflation than non-food producing states? So there's definitely something amiss within the value chain and how food goes from farm to table in that sense. I'll quickly go to Kaduna State, where certainly I think the highlight was that honorary, although it was a later honoring, from the other group that received their honors on June 12th of Colonel Dangiwa Umar. And it spoke to the tone of all that happened yesterday that we witnessed when we look at Ubasani and his track record in Kaduna State and his repertoire even before he came into office. He was somebody who built a name for himself as a bridge builder, because in the struggle for democracy, he is one of those people who worked together with the likes of Colonel Dangiwa Umar, Shehu Sani, to ensure that the North didn't become monolithic, that the North could work together with the South when it came to the pursuit of democracy. So that was important and befitting. Now, one thing that stood out to me yesterday is the fact that that 300-bed specialist hospital was initiated in 2009. And that's why it was appropriate for the former Vice President Namadi Sambo to be there, because it was under his governorship of Kaduna State that this project was initiated. Under Governor Nasir Al-Rufai, a large portion of the funding for this project was secured. And now we are seeing this administration has completed this project. And this is not something we see often. We have to acknowledge the fact that it is not often in Nigeria we see that various governors are able to pass on the baton of these very important and significant projects. And it's something we need to see more of, because we see there's a consistent attitude of white elephant projects, abandoning what your predecessor did and, trying to create something of your own. So we have to acknowledge that even with the various political undertones happening within the state, it's important that these projects continue despite which administration moves forward. The next major highlight was President's reference to the fact that there's a departure from what he called a toxic environment in that state. And kudos to Uba Sani. What is Uba Sani did? Uba Sani came in and he became a real flag bearer of what we have come to know as the non-kinetic approach. Now, it's often we are confused and we often underestimate what can be achieved with non-kinetic issues. He has appointed commissioners from southern Kaduna. He has ensured that there's a degree of economic justice in southern Kaduna. How has he done that? You see places like Kafanchan, for example, which now have well-developed roads. There's now access from the farms to the markets. There's rural empowerment projects ongoing there. And there's more of a sense of inclusivity, and this is based on his passion for economic justice. So it's important to highlight, because we've been focusing on Benue State and other issues that are having spates of insecurity that have foundational issues around ethnic, religious clashes. And what we used to hear from southern Kaduna was heartbreaking. And that has reduced drastically. And it's really important for us to acknowledge initiatives like the Kaduna State Peace Dialogue Group, for example, that was instituted by the Governor Uba Sani to ensure that there is this dialogue that continues to happen. So, of course, very important for us to highlight how he has taken advantage of non-kinetic approaches to address issues of insecurity. And my final take, the sole administrator of Rivers State, he says that 85% of the budget that he has brought for presentation was created by Governor Simfubara, that he has only made 15% a contribution to it, which he says is to pay off pensions and for new projects and so forth. And I think that no matter how much your contribution is, even if it's 1%, it's not your place. You're not democratically elected. And I hope we can see more of a body language towards the return of the democratically elected official of the state to oversee the people's budget that the sole administrator is calling a people-first budget. It's not his place because he doesn't represent the people. So I'm not sure that he's the right person to tell us that this particular budget is people-centric.